What's happening behind the turbine? What's actually happening behind Wind 1? Next slide. As recent as January of this year, the Department of Energy and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have concluded that more research is necessary because the wake effect behind a wind turbine is so complicated. Next slide. Look at the wakes of those turbines in the front. What are the wake shedding effects on those rows of turbines behind the first in line? Next slide. Turbine engineers want to know how far one turbine should be placed from another. The point being, wind energy is wasted on surrounding turbines if the wind isn't allowed to regain its initial velocity and character. Next slide. Before the January 2011 Department of Energy and NOAA conference, 6 to 7 rotor diameters were thought to be enough setback between turbines in the prevailing wind reference. Prevailing wind over Wind 1 is north to northwest in the winter months and southwest during the summertime. I live 1,600 feet almost due south of Wind 1. Next slide. The concern of the Department of Energy and NOAA and what was believed to be appropriate setbacks between turbines is now being found inadequate. This researcher, Mr. Holland, identified 16 rotor diameters possibly being necessary. This equates to 4,304 feet around Wind 1. An important component in this wake shedding area is the low pressure cell that develops. Next slide. Low pressure cells are very familiar on TV weather forecast. Next slide. What happens to a sound wave in a low pressure cell behind Wind 1? When the atmospheric pressure drops, the air gets cooler, the relative humidity increases, and a sound wave travels further. Next slide. A low frequency fluctuation has been found to be a component of the wake itself. As recent as June 2011, researchers from Denmark, in a recently published and peer-reviewed study, contend that low-frequency sound can be heard, and they call into question the application of various sound pressure weighting metrics. Weighting curves are misunderstood or misused to give the impression of dramatically high or negligibly low levels. Next slide. NASA, another relevant informational source, has concluded highest concentrations of low frequency happen at high wind speeds and highest power outputs. So, the Board of Selectmen, by their 23-mile-an-hour restriction on Wind 1 in late February of this year, unknowingly reduced the highest levels of low-frequency impact on neighbors. The resulting town complaint log entries after March 2nd will, I'm sure, demonstrate this. Next slide. G-weighting would be the more accurate evaluation tool for infrasound. Falmouth sound consultant, HMMH, is on record stating A-weighting significantly de-emphasizes low-frequency evaluation. Further, NASA supports HMMH's claim and states that A-weighting allows mid-range frequencies to dominate the evaluation at large distances. Next slide. Vibration effects on the human body have been researched. I happened to suffer, starting in the spring of 2010, about the same time Wind 1 went operational, from headaches. The research done in Portugal gives reason to question whether constant low-level, low-frequency noise doses impact human health. Next slide. In addition to calling into question the misapplication of various sound pressure weighting curves, these Danish researchers contend that logarithmic methods used to model wind speeds above the ground may be inappropriate. Their paper cites several studies where wind speeds deviate substantially from assumed logarithmic profiles. Next slide. These three excerpts introduce the atmospheric effect on low-frequency sound waves, the most important of which is that it should be, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the low-frequency part of the spectrum plays an important role in the noise of the neighbors, and that low-frequency sound must be treated seriously in the assessment of noise from large turbines. Next slide. This slide represents low-frequency analysis on a Vestas 82 turbine, much the same as Wind 1, with the less accurate A-weighting metric. What would happen? What would it look like if the more appropriate G-weighting metric were used? Next slide. Again, another recommendation from the World Health Organization. Low-frequency noise can disturb rest and sleep even at low pressure levels. Next slide. So just to review, low and infrasound frequencies are not well evaluated by the A-weighting curve, travel distances greater than the mid-range frequencies, and have a vibratory rather than audible noise character. The effects of low-frequency infrasound on humans are not well understood. This is from the National Research Council of the National Academies, 2007, another relevant source of information. Yet regulators undertake literature reviews to make evidence-based decisions regarding health impacts of wind turbines and conclude adverse health consequences are not justified by the evidence. Doesn't it strike you odd that the evidence regulators use to base their decisions is classified as not well understood, but they remain willing to risk the health of residents? Next slide. In conclusion, I've offered a little insight as to what's taking place behind a wind turbine, behind Wind 1. Currently, regulators rely on states' generalized community noise standards in examining wind turbines. There are no standards addressing noise pollutants you can't hear, yet can feel. I'm sorry to report, Falmouth's noise regulations are not providing the same protection from wind turbine noise as they do from other noise sources. Low frequency, infrasound risk management analysis is necessary. Where public health is at stake, public health risk must hold precedence over wind turbine operational strategies.